Couldn't help myself. It feels so good. How's it going? Good to see you guys. How's it been? So we got Dave Butler in the house. I don't know if you guys have heard of Dave Butler. He's an amazing sci-fi writer. He's an author. He's also doing some deep dives into the mysteries of faith. Check out that book. Actually, we got a copy right there.
Yeah, I got two of his books here. So I've got Plain and Precious Things, which is sort of the introduction to a lot of these ideas that we're going to be talking about. And then I've got right here his other one, The Goodness and Mysteries, which is more of a deep dive. And he has a third book coming out soon, The Language of Adam.
Yeah, May 1st.
Well, now that we've spoken for you, I don't. Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and your life and your research and all that?
So I'm old, Andreas, so there's a lot of it. Look, my biography is not that interesting. I'm a weirdo, so
you'll fit right in here.
Okay, perfect. I'm a lawyer. I've been a mergers and acquisitions consultant, a corporate trainer. I am not an academic. I am a writer. I've got 18 published science fiction and fantasy novels out. My second collection of short stories probably comes out in the next year. And I am don't tell anybody, I am a Mormon.
Dude, that's where all the cool sci-fi. Like, this is the thing. Like, look at Battlestar Galactica. I'm sorry, everybody. I know. But
it's true. It's true. Orson Scott Card, Brandon Sanderson, James Dashner, Stephanie Meyer. We got a lot of them. Brandon Mull. Yeah.
Oh, dude, what was the other one? I just like Tim Allen. The Galaxy Quest.
Galaxy Quest.
Yeah.
Is that too? Is that guy?
Yeah, seriously. He was. I don't know if he still is, but like he definitely, you can tell. I mean,
but in the background, yeah, cool.
Yeah.
So I've done all this kind of stuff, married, 3 kids, got a dog, and excited to be here with you guys. My nonfiction writing, we may end up intersecting into some of them. My Mormonism writings are here's at a high level of thesis. Okay. The Book of Mormon writers are temple worshipers, meaning initiates, members of an esoteric tradition.
Jedi stuff.
Yep. And so all of those of you who are convinced this is Freemasonry, get excited. Here we come. And they wrote like it. They wrote like they meant it. They expect you to also be initiated into their same esoteric tradition. So the better you understand that tradition, the experiences they had, which is a collection of ideas, including architecture, spatial sequences, wordplay, their sort of moral laws, sights, sounds, and even tastes. The better you understand the book. We may end up down there, but I think we're going to at least start out and maybe spend most of our time in the Old Testament, New Testament.
Well, it is interesting for a lot of reasons. For a lot of people that we've been looking into all these different things, like Tartaria is a big part of it as well. This idea of like a universal truth, like an antediluvian religion, maybe that people all sort of have a little bit of still together, but most people have lost the whole picture. But you still have like families, people trying to be the best people they can be. And then there's this kind of hatred people have for modern Western religion, right? Because there's this idea that you're supposed to, you can believe in it, but you can kind of tune out because now you're saved and you don't have to worry about it. And also this idea you have to follow these weird dogmatic laws. Everybody gets really upset about dogmatic laws. So, but it seems like a lot of that's coming from this group, that, the Deuteronomist group that you're kind of talking about, right? Is that kind of, can we pin it on the Deuteronomists, Dave? Is that all right?
We can.
Yeah, we already did talk about this a little bit. This is sort of a follow-up on our First Temple Judaism, where we talked about how Yahweh was originally the son of El Elyon, the high god.
Yeah. That's awesome. Should we start it like a primer for people on like what do we mean when we say Deuteronomist? Is that helpful? Is that a good thing?
Yeah.
Yes.
So okay, let me start actually with sort of a little background. So the Bible, okay, the Old Testament exists in several different universes of discourse. And this creates a challenge for us, okay? There is a universe of discourse around the archaeology of the Bible and the scholarship doing the archaeology of the Bible. And there is a separate universe of discourse around the sort of literary studies, studying the Bible by reading it and reading other ancient texts. And actually, historically, those two universes didn't talk to each other very much. It's in the last kind of 30 years that people like Israel Finkelstein or Zionid Savit have really kind of challenged, or William Deaver have kind of challenged and said, hey, I think the challenges mostly come from the archaeology side. Look, you cannot just dismiss us and insist that the dating based on the Book of Kings is correct, because look at what we see here, right? So those universes are starting to talk to each other. But there's another universe of discourse out here, which is the pulpit. And the average person who is familiar with the Bible is familiar with it in that universe of discourse, meaning you have gone to shul, okay, you heard speeches, homilies at mass, right? You went to Sunday school, and that universe is basically not talking to the other ones at all. Okay, so if what I'm about to say sounds alien, if you say, wow, I know the Bible pretty well, and that's crazy, Dave, look at his hair, is obviously a madman not to be taken seriously, okay? I have brought along this Bible dictionary to convince you, okay? Because I'm going to do some reading out of this Bible dictionary. This is, in fact, only one of 5 volumes of the Anchor Bible Dictionary. I have brought this, I own it, as one does, okay? I brought this because it is middle of the road. Okay, this is not a radical, this is not some kind of secular Marxist dictionary of the Bible. It's not some kind of Protestant fundamentalist. This is published by Doubleday. It's big, middle of the road scholarship. About 30 years old. Maybe it's due for a revision. But this is, what I'm about to tell you, at least at this kind of first level of discussion, is not a radical theory. Okay. In fact, let me start by I'll even read a quote that says that. Okay. So the idea starts in 1943 with a guy named Noth, N-O-T-H. He's German. So his article is called Übergruppensführer Berauma von Deuteronomium or something, right? Okay. And he basically says, look, if you look at it, the book of Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, Samuel, Kings looks like one literary composition. It shares the same vocabulary and the same understanding, and is opposed to the other 2 major historical units in the Bible, which are what's called the Tetratuch, okay, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers. So that's one history. And the other one is called the Chronicles complex, which is Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah. So there's 3 histories of Israel contained in the Old Testament. And one of them is the one that goes Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, Kings, Samuel, Kings. Okay? And the Deuteronomist, now his original thesis was a guy, Fred Deuteronomist, circa 560 BC, did this. Generally, people don't think it was one guy anymore, okay? But the thesis gained, in fact, I'll read you 2 quotes about this, okay? One, again, this is out of Ye Middle of the Road Standard Bible Dictionary, okay? Not a Mormon document, not a Mormon writing this article. The main point of Noth's monograph, that Deuteronomy Kings represents an original literary unit, gained wide acceptance almost immediately. The acceptance of this viewpoint has continued such that, to the extent that any position in biblical studies can be regarded as the consensus viewpoint, the existence of the Deuteronomist historian has achieved almost canonical status. This is the basic idea of Old Testament scholarly studies, okay? Is that these things were edited. Now, probably not by a guy, probably not by Fred. It's thought that they were probably edited now by a school. There's a guy named Moshe Weinfeld, who, famous book, Deuteronomy and the Deuteronomic Historian, proposed this. And the idea is it wasn't one guy, it was people, men, okay? It was men, it was guys, dudes, from about the time of Hezekiah, so kind of middle of the eighth century, middle of the seventh. In the BC, I get the centuries confused, but like 740 BC, that's 8th century. In the 8th century BC to the 6th century BC, so during the exile. Okay, this period of time, there was a school, like a bunch of like-minded scholars and scribes and nobles who together set about revising the history of Israel.
And like some kind of like Cohen priesthood, or like one of the priesthoods then, or
probably with some compliance of one of the priesthoods. There's a very clear indication. We probably should read 2 Kings 23 before we're done here, because it's vile. Because it's a record of great evil trumpeted as great good. And now I know someone is already gearing up in the comments to call me an idolater. It's fine, I can take it.
You found a pretty chill group. You'll be all right.
Okay, good. All right. So let's hold this for a minute. Let's just talk a little bit at a little
lurk in the back. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll come back to it. So when I say rewrote Israel's history, what do they do? Well, first of all, Deuteronomy copies a lot of sacred texts from, for example, Exodus. It repeats a lot of Exodus, but it changes them. Okay.
Okay, yeah, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just saying, so it's changing it? Like, what's it doing to change it? That's sneaky.
Okay, so one example, one easy example. It is sneaky.
Yeah.
Right? It's sneaky, especially when not everybody reads. People don't have their own hard copy of their Bible in their house to go check and say, man, I could have sworn that last week it said something different. Oh, look right here. He's wrong, right? No. So, but for example, Deuteronomy 5 lists the 10 commandments, but they're not exactly the same. And a notable difference, is in Exodus 20. Okay, in Exodus 20, God says, keep the Sabbath day holy. Do you remember why he says to keep the Sabbath day holy? I don't know. Okay, no, fair enough.
I've made it for you. I forget. No.
No, that's pretty good. He says, actually, my computer's not loading fast enough, so I'm just going to quote. I'm going to paraphrase. I'm going to quote from memory. Okay. He says, because in 6 days God made the earth, and on the 7th day he rested. So he connects the Sabbath day to the creation of the earth. That is, by the way, a temple document. What do I mean by that? I mean, if you read John Walton, The Lost World of Genesis 1, he says it's a temple liturgy, but it's an old observation that the creation of the tabernacle in the book of Exodus follows the pattern of that creation. So that creation of the earth is also the creation of the temple, okay? So the Deuteronomists walk away from that sort of temple thing, and instead, in Deuteronomy 5, they say, keep the Sabbath day holy, because you escaped out of Egypt, and the Lord God let you escaped out of Egypt. Okay.
So it's like a ransom. So like originally it's like this is the Lord's day. So you're supposed to like fully focus, like that day is supposed to be 100% focused on that. And otherwise now it's like you're supposed to be grateful that you're no longer a slave.
Right.
To our state.
Right. And it walks away from the world of the temple where, to borrow Mircea Eliada's phrase, the temple exists in illo tempore. It's a mythological place, right? Things that happen in the temple are eternally true, and they recur. They happen cyclically, right? It walks away from that and tries to root things in history. No. The reason to do this is because of the Exodus, because of the Passover. Now, that's a small example, okay? I'm going to quote out of this Bible dictionary. So rather than look up like 50 verses to see a bunch of examples, let me just go down and just list a bunch of the examples that Deuteronomy makes in the same way. Okay. So there we go. First of all, in the Tetratuch, God lives in his temple. And I like how, Andreas, you were talking about an intuitive understanding of the world where gods are something like people, only more powerful, right? They shine. They're
only better. Yeah.
They're only better. It's dangerous to be in their presence, right? They're made of fire, things like this.
Right. Yeah.
In Deuteronomy, God does not dwell in the temple. God's name dwells in the temple. God does not dwell in the temple. In fact, the temple is said to be not big enough to hold God. The ark, which elsewhere is the throne of God, or in Chronicles 28, First Chronicles 28 is said to be the chariot of God. So Merkavah mysticism, Merkavah is the chariot, is the mystical ascent in some kinds of Judaism to behold the Ark of the Covenant, which is the Merkavah, the chariot of God. Okay, it's not in Deuteronomy. It just holds the law, and that's it. In the Pentateuch, you could see God. The elders of Israel in Exodus 24 ascend, and they not only see God, they eat a meal with him before Moses goes up behind the veil on the top of Sinai, behind the clouds on top of Sinai. Deuteronomy says emphatically, you cannot see God. God also does not have a meal, because the other books said that God liked sacrifices. They were pleasing to him. There was a sense in which he seemed to participate in them. That's totally obliterated in Deuteronomy. The only real reasons that seem to be given for the sacrifices is to feed the poor. Now, by the way, there is like an element, right? So a lot of these changes have a theme, which is kind of much more rationalistic, much less mythological. Like we're sort of, it's surprising how modern this fight feels.
Right. But there's like things about it that are saying, like, if you're doing, even the Veda, right? Like there's this idea, like if you're doing these certain things, then you're in the present, you're capable of being in the presence of God. Like if you're not exercising, you're not able to run, kind of a thing.
Yep.
But if this whole culture is moving further and further away from doing the things that make it possible for them to be in the midst of, ambrosia, then they're probably going to be more and more secular and humanist, because they're thinking, okay, well, we don't see that. We haven't seen that in generations.
Yeah. Now there are some admirable things, right? Like the idea that, hey, you perform a sacrifice and the meat needs to go to the poor. Like that's admirable, right? And we don't have to despise somebody for being rationalist and right, but it's sort of surprising how you just don't think of 2,600 years ago, 600 to 700 BC as being a time of when rationalists are dethroning religion, right? But that's sort of what's going on here. By the way, they hate sin offerings. So in Exodus, there are offerings you can make for sin, and Deuteronomy, in Leviticus 4 and 5. Deuteronomy doesn't have.
So what's a sin offering exactly? Is that like the Catholic thing? So
Leviticus 4 and 5, if you inadvertently commit various kinds of sin, you can sacrifice an animal and that atones for it.
Okay, so just general atonement for something it's not like the pre-atonement thing. It's like after you sinned,
right.
Right. It's Deuteronomy, it doesn't ban the idea of atoning for another's sins, right?
It bans there's a verse, I'm gonna forget where it is, we can find it, that says nobody can atone for the sin of somebody else.
Interesting.
Which is interesting, because we'll come back and talk about the Day of Atonement, which is the great festival on which all of Israel's sins are atoned.
Right.
And they not only don't repeat it, they remove it from their calendar. So there are calendars in Exodus and Numbers, and in Deuteronomy 16. And the one in Deuteronomy 16 mentions the great feasts of Passover, weeks, and tabernacles, but not the Day of Atonement. They take it out. And we'll come back and talk about that and why that's super interesting, and sort of some surprising connections with Christianity and the Gospel of John. Okay, in a minute. So because I'm not done, there's other stuff to do. One of the interesting side effects is the Deuteronomists invent secular slaughter. So prior to these guys, every time you killed an animal, it was a sacred act. Okay, it was always a sacrifice. And by the way, the blood had to be treated a certain way, right? The blood can only be spilled on an altar, and that is no longer true. Now, there's a related point. I should have taken this in the other order. So together with changes in like the text and the laws, one of the big underlying themes is Deuteronomy and the Deuteronomists are centralizing everything. Everything is being brought into Jerusalem. Okay, you can't do this worship out in your little village anymore, which is why you can't sacrificially slaughter animals out in your little village anymore, because your altar is no longer valid.
So everyone had their own altars before this point.
Well, it's been suggested that what Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob do in Genesis was the religion of Israel that the Deuteronomists are reacting to. And the religion of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is that, like, when the family has a sacred experience, they erect a matzebet, a standing stone, or they build an altar and they sacrifice there.
So like a shrine, like, because this is interesting because it's exactly the same kind of thing. You'd have a shrine in, China, right, in India, or in America. Especially interesting is like the mountains in America, like family shrines. Okay,
a local shrine in your backyard, and you would have.
And I know one thing that Margaret Barker really focused on a lot in her writings is that the Melchizedek priesthood that's focused on in the book of Hebrews, which is also very much Day of Atonement theology, that Melchizedek religion was the religion that the Deuteronomists removed. This sort of esoteric religion with the high priesthood.
Yeah. We when we read 2 Kings 23 in a minute, I'm going to make some suggestions about that.
Right.
Absolutely. So they're centralizing power. They create secular slaughter. They change Passover. They take away all the funky magic sounding stuff, like where you would spread blood on the lintel to keep the demons away. They take that disappears in Deuteronomist Passover,
which is, by the way, really good for biodynamic farming. All right, I just want to say.
Also, I like the funky weird stuff, so I miss it. There's something else too. So there's and I'm not going to read the verses, but I'll just read a couple of quotes on it out of here. Well, one more point before that. Deuteronomy has an ideology of nationalism and a general air of superiority, right? So it's this, not like I'm saying, oh, and they were bigoted, we should hate them for that, but like along with everything else, they were bigoted.
But they're clearly thinking that their temple is like the place that should be they should have a monopoly on the culture's, being able to make money off of the atonement and whatever.
Which, by the way, you see that attitude all the way down into John 4, Jesus' encounter with a Samaritan at the well, right? And the Samaritans, well, we can talk about the Samaritans later maybe, but their story was not, oh, we were people who the Assyrians moved in to replace the Israelites. Their story is, we were always here. We are the Shomrim. We're still keeping. We're the keepers of the old way. You guys are the heretical innovation insisting on this Jerusalem temple.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, because it's like a caste system thing where the indigenous people are always put to the untouchable class, right? Yeah. Okay.
Would you say that the Samaritans were a tribe of Israel, perhaps, maybe from the northern kingdom?
So that's what their story is. Their story is they were part of the northern kingdom. They were always there. They are still keeping their original covenants. They have a Torah, a Pentateuch, the five books of Moses, that is not exactly the same as the one in the the Hebrew Bible that I use. One of the big differences is that rather than indicating that the temple should be built at Jerusalem, it indicates the temple should be built at Mount Gerizim. Right? So just flat out disagrees. So So okay, there's one more thing about Deuteronomy's ideology, and this is going to lead us into the murder-happy King Josiah. Okay. So, by the way, I'm in office, and some folks have come to clean stuff. So if you hear rolling wheels, someone will come take my...
I'll blame whoever put glitter on the ground.
Yeah, it was probably me. I like to shake it in my hair.
Fair.
Deuteronomy changes the idea of holy war. Okay. And it announces a ban against Canaanites. A ban is harem, which is a sacred instruction that you can kill them. Okay. And it's a ban against all the Deuteronomists. And the original harem in the other books referred to hostile cities. Okay, so there'd be a war against a city, and so that city, you know, is harem, and everybody can kill it. Okay. The ban against the Canaanites in Deuteronomy applies to all the Canaanites who are your neighbors, and all the Canaanites in the land. And the reason for it is lest they lead you into doing all the abominable things that they have done for their gods, and you shall be sinful to Yahweh your God. In other words, holy war is no longer, we're going to go fight that city because they did a grievous thing. It's all of your neighbors who are doing religion wrong. You can kill them.
Wow, it's like jihad kind of back then.
Yes, this is the declaration of war on your. Now it says they're Canaanites. Were they?
Well, in other words, like they're all the same blood, but at a certain point they have like a nuance of how that they want to worship. But the way that their nuance is apparently is you have to do it at our place. You have to use our terms, and you have to like get on the ground and sacrifice yourself as a chicken. Apparently, it's pretty bad. It looks like.
Yeah. So now, I want to read 2 Kings 23, but I don't want to feel like I am like rushing this train so fast I'm running you guys over. So what am I missing here? What should we be saying before we get to 2
The B'nai Elohim, the sons of God, maybe?
Oh, this is great. Thank you for bringing that up, Chad. That is awesome. So I want to say Deuteronomy 32:8, maybe.
8 through 9, yeah.
Yeah, if you want to bring that up. So look, the text of the Bible, the Old Testament, has been tampered with. And there are kind of lots of little ways that it has been tampered with.
Which one is it? Deuteronomy chapter 8, 1 through 9?
Deuteronomy 32, 8 through 9. The Dead Sea Scrolls version is what the original is.
Yeah. So when you're doing sort of text studies of the Old Testament, you're trying to, and you want to sort of make sure you're looking at what the verse really originally was meant to say. You run into difficulty, which is that there are various pretty old versions that don't agree with each other. And so you have to kind of weigh them and say, well, what do I think it originally said? So now this verse 8, when the Most High God Elyon divided the nations their inheritance, when he separated the sons of Adam, he set the bounds of the people according to the number of the children of Israel. So this is what, if I opened up my Hebrew Bible, this is what it would say. This is, I think, the Leningrad Codex is the name of the text. It's like dates to about 1000 AD or something.
Leningrad, that's nice.
Yeah, I think that's right. I could be wrong. It's out of memory. It says that, you know, that God, the highest God, divided the nations according to the numbers of the children of Israel. This is what the Hebrew text is that we have known kind of since forever, always said. Now, the Hebrew text is the first one you look at, but the second one you look at is the Greek, which is called the Septuagint. And you also see that abbreviated LXX, which is the number 70, and Septuagint means like the 70 book, okay? The Septuagint, now why do you look at it? Well, because it's a Greek copy, but it's very old. So the Old Testament was translated into Greek like the 3rd century BC by Jewish scholars in Alexandria, okay? And sometimes the Septuagint preserves a legitimate older reading. And so you go look at it and say, yeah, actually, probably the Hebrew originally said this, and it got changed for some reason in the Hebrew, right? So the Greek preserves the old Hebrew reading, but the Hebrew we have, it got changed because of mistake or because people didn't like the idea, and so they went in and doctored the text. So the Greek says, instead of saying that God divided the world according to the number of the children of Israel, it says according to the number of the sons of God. Now, that's different.
Right.
Okay. That is different because, I love it. Is that a comparison between the Dead Sea Scrolls and very good.
Yeah.
So that's amazing. So we're not even to the Dead Sea Scrolls yet. So realize first, the Greek said that. And people said for forever, well, the Greek is wrong. The Greek is a mistake because God doesn't have sons. Okay. Now, what is the idea embodied in God dividing the nation among the sons of God? Well, the idea is that every nation has its own son of God, and that is its national deity. So El Elyon is the high God, Interesting question. Is there a mother? Okay. And then every nation has its son. And so maybe the Canaan has Baal, and maybe Israel has Yahweh. And by the way, the commandment, you shall have no other gods before me, actually implies that there are other gods. You worship me. I am your God. Look over here. Look over here. Right? Don't look over there. I am your God. Right? So
you wouldn't like waste the time like inscribing that on stone. You know what I mean? It's a lot of work to inscribe stone. Like
that's right.
Right.
It is a lot of
It's
work.
also
Put that right.
it's also very interesting because El Elyon, he is symbolized by a bull. And when the Israelites are worshiping that golden calf, that's an idol of Yahweh. They believe it. They say this is the God that saved us from from Egypt, and they're worshiping a calf, which is a son of a bull. So they are worshiping a son of the high God.
It's also, by the way, this is hidden in translation. I want to say it's in First Kings. There's a description of Solomon sitting on his throne, and the King James translation says something like, it refers to like the high rounded part above him, which is Rosh Ogal, but the vowel pointing could be different, which would be Rosh Egel, which means if that's true, then Solomon had a calf's head on the throne above him, right? And
the Davidic king in that was sort of a representative of the Lord in that priesthood.
I just wanted to say also, like, because you asked like what's something to cover before we get to the King's verse, is just you talked about how there are these different priesthoods, and after Moses, there's priesthoods that emerge that have power. Aaronic priesthood, the Cohen priesthoods, doing the temple sacrifices for a long time, and then you get to a point. I mean, I guess also the Melchizedek priesthood has the right to take taxes. So I feel like that plays into this because like they're doing magic and able to take taxes to direct like the flow of society. So when the Aaronic or Cohen priesthood saying we really don't need them, and we're doing everything, and we should take the taxes really because we're doing the sacrifices, and we should redistribute it. I think that's really interesting looking at the different priesthoods.
I have a verse right here that I pulled up in Psalms 89:6, which in the King James it says, "For who in the heaven can be compared to the Lord? Who among the sons of the mighty can be likened to the Lord?" And if you look at the original Hebrew text, this is one that remains before the idea that Yahweh the Lord was the son of the high God. It says, "Who among the sons of Eliam or Elohim can be compared to Jehovah, can be compared to Yahweh?" So it's essentially saying that Yahweh is one of the sons of the Most High God, but he also holds a unique position among the B'nai Elohim, among the sons of God.
He's the best.
Exactly.
Yeah. Let me round up on that sons of God point, right? So we went along forever thinking the Greek was wrong and that was the sons of Israel in Deuteronomy 32:8 until the Dead Sea Scrolls showed up. And then we went, oh, there are a bunch of old Hebrew versions 1,000 years older than the Leningrad Codex that said sons of God, and the opinion flipped the other way. And now almost everybody says, yeah, it must have been sons of God, right? So there's like all kinds of morals in there. The Melchizedek priesthood is super interesting because it's in the Old Testament. Man, it's very few passages and passages that are really hard to read, which sort of seems like maybe it's something that people have tried to obfuscate.
A little bit of scrubbing going on, right? Yeah.
Yeah, but it seems like, for example, that he may have been the king at some point. Like it was a royal priesthood. I mean, that's in the name Melchizedek for one thing, king of righteousness or righteous king. It's super interesting in Psalm 110. It seems like the Melchizedek priest, and the Greek and Hebrew are different here, but it seems like the Melchizedek priest is in some sense born, not made. Like maybe bloodline has to do with it, but maybe also the way of his being made the Melchizedek priest is understood as a birth, right? So maybe there are women involved.
Right. That's another interesting thing. This idea that the Cohen priesthood or the Cohenot, like that there's a missing thing about, like you talk about Asherah, the wife of God, this idea of the feminine priesthood being kind of initiating the Melchizedek priesthood somehow. Because then the Melchizedek priesthood's like the Brahmin or something, because they're doing like a Enochian language of God. This seems like.
Yeah.
It's also very interesting with that. We can verify that specific scripture in Deuteronomy has been altered because we have that older version of it. We don't know what other alterations there may be. But in Jeremiah 8, chapter 8, he's the prophet at the time of these reforms going on. He essentially talks about the book of the law. He says, how can you, and the book of the law is Deuteronomy, for those who aren't aware, the basis for the reforms. He says, how can you claim that we are wise, for we have the law of the Lord, when the lying pen of scribes has turned it into a lie? And wisdom, when he talks about wisdom in those verses, that's also the name of the divine mother. In Proverbs 3, I believe, it compares wisdom. It says she is a tree of life.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. We can come back and talk about that. It not only says that, it puns on the name Asherah. So this is Proverbs 3:13-18. Margaret Barker, Methodist scholar Margaret Barker, says is the only passage in the Bible where the name of Asherah is connected to the idea of a tree of life.
There it is.
Yeah. Okay. So should we talk 2 Kings 23?
Yeah, okay. Let's do it. Let me pull it up.
So here is the headline. Your Bible dictionary says King Josiah was the greatest dude ever. Let's examine what the greatest dude ever did. Okay. So I think we start like in verse kind of 5 or 6 here. 4 maybe. So the beginning of the story, there we go, 5. The beginning of the story is we find the book of Deuteronomy. Now, because the book of Deuteronomy very conveniently supports this reform agenda of King Josiah, and because it also is totally aligned with the judgment that the books of Kings makes on all the prior kings, there's this interesting question. Did they find the book of Deuteronomy, or did they write it? Or did they take some old core of Deuteronomy and edit it to suit their purposes? Whatever it is, generally it's understood that the book of Deuteronomy is like the charter for the reforms. I put reform in scare quotes because it's pretty clear we're not moving Israel back to its pristine.
And they're not Bernie Bush kind of people.
Right. We're not restoring the religion of Abraham. That is what we're wiping out. Okay. So the changes. But let's start with verse 5. Man, there's stuff to say in verse 5. So he put down the idolatrous priest. He is Josiah. Put down sounds clinical. What he did was hishbeat, which is he obliterated them. He caused them to cease to exist. Now, idolatrous priests, Andreas, I want to talk about this because here's your Melchizedek stuff, okay? So the word here is kemarim. You know what? I might jump over into the YouTube and put stuff in the chat.
This is sketch right here because it's like heretic, right? Like, because heretic has become a word that means like all these other things, but it used to mean just to be able to choose, is like person who chooses or has their own opinion.
That's exactly right. So look, the word here is the kemarim. This is the plural of a comer. Okay, and the word only appears a handful of times, and it's said to mean idolatrous priest. There's not a very good reason to think it's an idolatrous priest. It seems to be derived from a word that means dark or gloomy, which is weird, right? Because that implies that these guys named themselves the dark ones, the gloomy ones, which who does that?
Yeah, right. Are we the baddies? Yeah. Like
are we the baddies? Yeah. I don't think they named themselves the baddies. By the way, the equivalent in Syriac, what is Syriac?
There is a thing though also like that Luciferians are all about like the light, and that like in the beginning there was darkness, that God permitted light to exist within, right?
Yeah.
Like, so we think of space is filled with darkness, kind of this idea. So darkness isn't this evil thing. In fact, it's a lot of the Disney Luciferianism that teaches us that light is always like this great like side of it. It could be also like that. I don't know. But sorry, you were about to say.
It could be. There's an old idea that, for example, the planet Saturn was associated with the idea of melancholy and a certain kind of darkness, which was thought to be a path to wisdom. So Saturnine as an adjective meant gloomy, depressive, sad, but also wise, right?
That
So
might be.
it is possible. Okay, it is possible. But let me throw out an alternative. So in the Syriac Bible, the old Syriac Bible rejoices in the glorious name of the Peshitta. Okay. There is an equivalent of Comer, and it is a Qumrah. Okay. And as it happens, in Genesis 14, in the Peshitta, Melchizedek is a Qumrah. Okay, he's not a Cohen. He's of this other order of priests. Now that's interesting. Now,
so what are the Qumrah like? They sound. I mean, I already sound like I like it already. What is it?
Yeah, well, let me throw out a hypothesis here. Okay, now we're getting into original Dave scholarship. This is original Dave hypothesis. I don't believe anyone has suggested this except me. It's probably true because let's face it, I am very wise. So, so there is a verb root. Okay, a 3-letter root, which is not so. If you think about this in like sort of Roman characters, you know, KMR are the root letters of the comers, and this is sort of het instead of kaf. It's like a ch instead of a k, but it would be a homer instead of a comer. Okay, now if it said homer instead, what might that word mean? Well, it turns out it might mean some pretty interesting things. Why? Because Hamar means to cover. For example, in Arabic, a himar is a veil.
Right. And it's so hard, the veil. Okay.
Yeah, in fact, himar is the obligation of a woman, a Muslim woman, to cover herself. But any veil or covering is himar. That meaning does exist only in one passage in the Hebrew Old Testament, Exodus 2, verse 3, where Moses' mother is putting Moses into the cradle and sending him off into the river. And it says she, tachmara, she hamarred the boat with hamar. She covered it with a covering. The King James says she daubed it with slime. Okay, but she covered it with a covering. So this idea that Hamar means to cover or to veil is in biblical Hebrew. And by the way, that would suggest that the Hamarim would be the veil priests.
I was trying to find that picture that Chad had earlier because there's a bunch of medieval paintings of like reaching the God's hand, reaching through the
search
veil.
for Melchizedek mosaic.
Melchizedek mosaic. Oh, sorry. I spelled that wrong as possible.
Yeah.
Melchizedek.
Melchizedek.
Are you looking
Izedek.
the stuff in Ravenna?
Zedek. I did it again.
Yeah.
Mosaic. There you go.
Yeah.
You could go to my Instagram. I do have it there. Yeah, it's one of those.
Okay.
There's an example. There's always great pictures like this. Like
so
there's a hand.
So that so that image of the hand coming through the veil to accept the offering that represents Christ. So you have the hand of the Lord passing through the veil, accepting the sacrifice through the veil.
I think that one's in Ravenna, isn't it? I think I've seen those.
It's in Italy. Someone I know
yeah.
commented on my Instagram post about it and was saying that they'd been and seen it.
I know that there's multiple. There's one in Trieste.
Yeah, there's the other one that one down there around like the middle. That's on the cover of Temple Theology.
Yeah, yeah. So the root Hamar also in both Arabic, but also in Hebrew and biblical Hebrew included, means fermentation or wine, which means if instead of being the Kemarim, if it was the Hamarim, we would read these as the veil priests or the priests who provide a sacrifice of wine and are associated with Melchizedek.
Right. Okay.
So, and what does Melchizedek do in the book of Genesis?
That's right. Chapter 14, verse 18. He meets Abraham, provides a feast of bread and wine. Right. So like that's it's a picture painted in very few words, but pretty coherent.
Yeah.
So okay. Josiah hates these guys. He beat them. He reduced them to nothing. Right. What else does it do? Let's
when is this happening? This is, you said like 600?
700, 600 BC.
Wow.
Josiah is like 640 or something.
Because that's crazy. Because if you think about then like the progression of, you know, what's going on until the collapse of the first temple, I mean, there,
It's
you
pretty
got,
quickly thereafter.
yeah, you've got this complete, I mean, the devastation of society after like, okay, keep going. This is good.
It's also very interesting because the same passage calls Melchizedek a priest of Elion, the Most High, and then
Genesis
in
14:18.
Hebrews it says that the Melchizedek order of priesthood is the higher priesthood.
Yeah,
Not after we're done with them. Yeah, exactly.
exactly.
This is a movie.
So 2 Kings 23. You want to bring that up again? Let's see what else he does.
Okay.
What other acts of violence? So he goes around smashing stuff, and I don't want to read all of this, but 6, and maybe we'll talk about this before we're done. I don't know how long is like 2 hours, hour and a half. How long do we talk, Andreas?
2 hours is good.
2 hours is good. Okay, we may have time to come back to this. What he smashes in verse 6 is something that another sort of the Deuteronomists have 2 heroes. Okay, Hezekiah and Josiah. They both attack the grove. What it really is Asherah. And Asherah is a goddess. We may come back and talk about her. She was immensely popular in the time period between Hezekiah and Isaiah and King Josiah and the end of the kingdom of Judah. Okay.
Wow. And this is the destruction of the This is the destruction of the female priestess. I mean, this is where it becomes kind of underground at very least.
This is it. Yeah, it becomes underground at least. Smashes them to bits. I think verse 7 is also good. I don't want to read all these verses, but I do want to. I think one more, and then let's jump ahead to like 20 because he starts actually killing people. We don't know exactly what he did to these Kamarim. He reduced them to 0. But let's see. Can we see verse 7? Can you scroll down? Are you able to do that? Oh, this is a good one. Yeah, let's do 7 and then we'll jump to 20. This is good. He break down the houses of the Sodomites. William Deaver is an archaeologist. He calls this historical slander. There's no reason to think there are any Sodomites involved. Okay. What he breaks down are the Kodesh, the houses of the Kodeshim that are by the house of the Lord. What are Kodeshim? They are sacred ones. The same word, when it appears in Deuteronomy 33:2, is translated as saints. The Lord Yahweh appears together with his saints in Deuteronomy 33. Here, because Josiah is smashing them up, I guess they can't be saints. They can't be angels. They can't be priests. These are all the natural things we would think. He must be attacking these sacred male cult prostitutes. There's no reason those things existed. Okay, this is now a lie on the part of the King James translators. Is what this is.
Totally. And you see this again.
That goes back to removing the B'nai Elohim, the sons of God. And one might say that Josiah is destroying the places of the sons of God.
So and then you're in 8 here, he's saying like he brought all the priests out of the cities of Judah, defiled the high places where the priests had burnt incense from Geba to Beersheba, and break down the high places of the gates that were in the entering in of the gate of Joshua, the governor of the city, which were on a man's left hand at the gate of the city. So basically destroyed all of their temples, destroyed their schools, destroyed their priesthood literature, their Torahs, all of this stuff.
He's implementing the agenda of Deuteronomy. You cannot do local sacrifice. You must come into Jerusalem where we can tax and control it and make sure you're Orthodox, right? And in fact,
you're not licensed.
You're not licensed. I think verse 20, if you jump ahead to verse 20, there's more in here, man. There's a bunch of stuff.
Wow.
And there's all these questions about these things.
He slew the priests of the high places that were there upon the altars and burned men's bones upon them and returned to Jerusalem. Okay, well, this is like straight out of the Catholic skull cathedrals, the bone churches later on. So that this keeps happening because of this.
This is murder. These are
more than murder. This is like a kind of creative murder where you like use the bones to build stuff.
Right.
This is special.
But what you're building, right, is you're deliberately defiling their sacred places. So it's not just we knock down the altar, we burn the altar, we knock down the altar, we murder your priest Frank, and we burn his bones on the altar so it's defiled, so you can never do it again. And by the way, if any of the rest of you try, you're next. Right? That's what's going on here.
Yeah, I also think it's really important to point out the fact that pretty much all the literature, except for the Deuteronomistic literature, portrays Josiah in a negative light. Because a lot of people will say, oh, he was going after these
Good
prostitutes,
guy,
he was getting rid
Josiah.
of idolatry and evil gods. Like Jeremiah accuses Josiah of altering the scriptures and defiling wisdom, which is the name of Asherah, the divine mother. All of the Enochian literature, the long exile Jews, the Dead Sea Scrolls, books found in Egypt, it all portrays Josiah's reform as a negative thing. The Book of Enoch specifically talks about how the temple was defiled and the tree of life, Asherah, will return.
Yeah, and I want to read verse 25 here in a minute, but I love also there's a prophecy. I might be in it's around here somewhere, chapter 22 maybe. He goes and gets a prophecy saying that he's going to go be victorious and restore the great national borders and whatever, and then he rides off to the Battle of Megiddo and is actually killed. So like there's a prophecy that's not fulfilled, which is like really interesting that that's included. And his death scene is in Chronicles, and it's fascinating because it has this little ambiguity where it says who kills Josiah. Well, it actually says he's fighting against the Egyptians, and it says the archers shot him, but it doesn't say whose archers. It doesn't say which archers, and there is the tantalizing possibility that his own men were like, "You son of a bitch!" Frank was the local priest, right? Now we don't know that. It's just a wonderful.
I'm going to imagine it like that from now on. Thank you.
If I were writing the novel, that would be how King Josiah died. So yeah, verse 25 just says he was the best King Judah ever had. By the way, the language is basically the same as what
is he writing. Is this like Trump writing his own book? Like, I don't know.
This is like he was the best. There's not one before him that was any better, and there wasn't one that was after. He really was the
best king.
It was amazing. Yeah, that's the voice you should have 2 Kings 23 narrated.
This is working.
Right. Yeah. So this is the implementation of the Deuteronomic agenda. Okay, this is how the book of Deuteronomy gets. So the idea that they declared holy war against the neighbors, it's not an idle threat. This legitimated the actions they took, which is to go out and say, what? You are performing a sacrifice not in Jerusalem, you Canaanite dog, and kill you. Okay. Dang. So if we step back, there's this, and just let's acknowledge this moment of weirdness. Okay. For anybody again who's kind of coming at this, and if you're hearing this and you're like, I'm having a hard time processing this, or Dave is obviously a liar, I get it. Okay.
I totally trust the establishment and just a bit ambiguous general. Yeah.
Yeah. Because what we're saying is the Old Testament has voices that not only disagree with each other, but one set of voices tried to kill the other set. They literally murder and also rewrite their texts. And
end up in charge for a while.
And end up in charge. Now, not for very long, right? They get wiped out by Babylon.
Yeah.
And by the way, when they come back, I think it's in the book of Ezra, they come back and they're trying to rebuild the temple. And the Haaretz, the people of the land who stayed behind, we don't know quite who they are. But
well, I mean, you just mentioned earlier the Samaritans. Like Samaritans were a group that didn't have to go to.
Right. So some group, which might include the Samaritans, try to stop them from rebuilding the temple. They petition, I think Cyrus, or I don't know, they petition the Persians and say, don't let these guys rebuild the temple. And they levy accusations of treason. They are not loyal to you, O king. Right. So they're when they come back, there are people who are still resisting them. Like, I remember these guys, right? Like they kill it, and they try and stop them from reassuming control. So I know that is if you are a Bible believer and you have just sort of taken at face value the Old Testament all your life, I realize this might be difficult to believe.
But if you saw Thundercats, which is based on this, by the way, you already know. So it's okay.
Well, in the chat, there's actually a comment I'd like to address by Arsini talking about Baal. So that person's saying that they think Baal might just be another word for God, a vague term.
Yeah, Baal good, Baal
Actually,
bad. What you got?
that's very close because Baal actually means Lord. The god that most people refer to as Baal is actually known as Hadad, right? And you have an interesting situation where I personally believe Hadad or Baal is an apostate form of Yahweh that was worshipped by the Canaanites because they have a lot of stories and stuff that are similar. Um, but you have an interesting situation where the word Baal at certain times was used to refer to Yahweh because Yahweh
I
is the
try to
Lord.
reserve the word apostate for like cannibals and pedophiles, but we'll get into that. I think we'll go. Keep going. Sorry.
No, I think that's right.
Right.
I think Baal is one of the other ones of the sons of Elyon, and a lot of Psalms we have discovered since the Library of Ugarit was found in 1978, I think, and deciphered, that a lot of Psalms borrow heavily from songs that seem to be originally older versions written about Baal.
Mm-hmm.
So, yes, rivalry. Yes, theological questions. But even in Hebrew today, Baal means Lord. Like it's one of the words for husband. I don't know if we're going to talk about Mary Magdalene, but when Jesus is arisen and is in the garden and Mary arrives, he calls her woman, Isha, i.e. Eve or wife. She calls him Baal, Lord, i.e. husband.
Yeah.
So yeah, Baal is go easy on Baal. He's
There's
not.
also an interesting story about Baal dying and being resurrected, and a woman being there for his resurrection that's seen as his wife. So, since we identify Yahweh with Jesus Christ, I do think the similarities between Baal and Yahweh come from the idea that the Canaanites were actually a part of Abraham's family before he went off and started his own family. So you have essentially duplicate gods going on, where they have the same stories about the Lord, the Son of God, except for they believe them to be two rival entities because they're rival nations.
Yeah.
Let's get that box song out of the way real quick. You know how that goes, right? We play this death metal song for a second. Sorry.
Okay. Cool.
I think that's good for now. We'll save it. But I appreciate the gesture. Box saga is important. I don't know. We definitely got to talk about Mary Magdalene. That's super important to this, especially if you're talking about this idea that there is a female priesthood. We mentioned this idea before, the idea that the Star Trek hands are coming from this thing that's today, even churches, synagogues are doing today, that the females are carrying on this tradition. So it seems like this is a thing that's even going on everywhere. This idea that there's a female priesthood that was lost or is hidden somehow since that period, which makes sense if they're like going around and like the things that they were doing to the male priest camps during the time of Josiah. I can only imagine what they were going to do to the nunneries or whatever.
Yeah, that symbol is a letter, which is the letter Sheen, which looks like a W, like in the square Hebrew letters that date back to about 300 BC. Yeah, that's it. It looks. Yeah, there we go. So this is the letter Sheen, which makes the sound sh, and is said to refer to shalom, peace, which is man, there's a lot of temple echoes in there. Okay, but I will tell you that when in number 6, when Aaron is promised, and I think this is the text that's directly connected with the blessing gesture, when Aaron is told that Yahweh will make his face shine upon him, one of the things it will give him is shalom, which is peace, health, completion. Shalom. It's also Shekinah, which is literally it means the tenting, and it's understood as the presence of God. And if you read Raphael Patai, the Hebrew goddess, late, it's just pretty clear at this point that the Israelites knew a goddess, like they just did. Okay, some of them clearly didn't like it. The Deuteronomists did not like it, but we have way too much archaeological and textual evidence in the Bible that they just did. Okay, but late, when they sort of they Jews sort of de-anthropomorphized some aspects of their religion. Many of them came to sort of think about the female aspect of divinity in terms of the Shekinah. So the Shekinah is the presence of God, and it's kind of like the female side of God. Shaddai is interesting. So this is also Shaddai. El Shaddai is translated by the King James as God Almighty, but that might not be what it means, because Shad in Hebrew is breast, and the natural reading for Shaddai is breasted. So El Shaddai looks like God with breasts, the God of breasts, the breasted God, right? Which sounds like another way to talk about female divinity, right? It sounds like
we have seen this stuff like the Matsu, like the Taiwanese, and like the East Sea goddess kind of thing. There's a huge belief in this sort of like ascended grandmother energy or something like that. All these things are connected to the Eastern Buddhist, Christian, Sophia of Christ kind of idea. So there's all these other places where it seems like that was allowed to proliferate.
Yeah.
But it's kind of dissipated from the mainstream tradition, right?
Or it's underground, right? Like it's
underground
with Mary, or it's thought about as an aspect of the Holy Spirit.
And that's a weird one too, because I think like maybe a lot of Christians or like a lot of religious people have a hard time with this idea, but it seems super intuitive if you're looking historically that a rabbi like at the time of Yeshua, like Jesus, would have had to have been married to be considered like any other rabbi, right? And so it seems just pretty much taken for granted then that he had to have been married. And probably Mary Magdalene fits that bill.
Mary.
It's really interesting because another thing we can verify the Deuteronomists altered is, like, if you look at Deuteronomy, you can just compare all the contradictions. And a major one is the fact that it removes the idea that anyone's ever seen God. Where Exodus will say Moses saw God face to face, and then Deuteronomy will say you didn't see a form, you only heard a voice.
Right. Yeah. So the Judean pillar figurines, this might be the right moment to look at these. So I say archaeology, okay? There's various, at this point, the debate is, debate's never over, but the debate has reached a resting point, okay? We have found many thousand, my last count I've read is like from 2013, and it was over 3,000 of these Judean pillar figurines.
So Abraham did not do a perfect job destroying them all.
Yeah, that's right. He didn't. Josiah did not get all of them. So these things are super popular in Jerusalem.
Like even at Josiah's time. This is like later.
That's right. Between the time of Hezekiah / Isaiah and the end of the monarchy. So for that 40 years is where the bulk of these are found. They found them earlier, they found them later, but
I mean, if you could just go to any temple all the time, you wouldn't even care. But especially if there were problems and you had to go underground, imagine like you'd see thousands and thousands of statues made because you don't want to have like private collections. You don't want to have one at your house.
Yeah. What if you were a woman and you wanted the goddess to be present with you during your childbirth? Right, you're not going into Jerusalem on a cart to give birth at the temple, right? You have a little statue to.
What was the translation you said? Like that meant the breasted one. What was the word?
El Shaddai, the breasted one.
El Shaddai.
So people look at these. By the way, sometimes we find them painted, and they seem to have had really big eyes, which is an interesting connection with Chad's point about wisdom. Right, wisdom, yeah, and we can look at it in a minute. But Proverbs 3 is the biblical text that connects the name Asherah, which is the name of this goddess, with wisdom. Asherah is a tree, with wisdom and the tree of life. Asherah is a tree, and if you look at those figurines' shape, right, they're actually different from the idols of countries around them. And the reason is the idols of countries around Judah have developed lower halves. So it's woman as sort of fully sexual being, woman as seductress and concubine, okay? The Judite ones always have a lower half that is a pole, or as commentators almost universally say, a tree trunk. So this is a goddess who is a nourishing mother, right? She is the breasted god, and she is a tree. And so, again, commentators universally say, this is obviously Asherah, and she was super popular, right? We know from archaeology. We also have a couple of famous archaeology sites where her name was written together with Yahweh. So we know from writing outside the Bible that they're, again, kind of, the inscriptions at Kuntalet Adrud and Kirbet El Kom are like, one of them a little bit precedes Isaiah and one is kind of Isaiah's time. So at the early part of that time spectrum.
So we have like a pretty solid wife of God, not in like it's ancient, but not that ancient. This is contemporary to what we're talking about.
The kingdom of Judah.
Yeah,
right.
they're at that moment it's happening. People have statues. People have, and they're wow.
And Deuteronomy hates her, and there are other
Deuteronomy hates her.
Who may hate her. There is, we may or may not go there tonight, but like I think there is very good reason to think that Isaiah does not. That Isaiah actually reveres her and sees the changes that are made in the time of Hezekiah and violently rejects them.
Well, I mean, I don't want to rush you, but like, do you feel like, I mean, bring up that kind of is interesting. Like, what do you think about Isaiah saying? Because he's kind of like major prophet. So if he's thinking about the divine feminine, that's kind of key.
Okay.
And it's interesting a point someone else makes in the chat about Yahweh and Asherah being a pair, where previously Asherah and El Elyon were a pair, but then you see that merger of Yahweh going from being El Elyon's son to being synonymous with him, and he inherits his mother as his consort.
Yeah, there's a lot of places that conversation can go. Let me point out one that is not the place we usually go, because I'm on a place where I'm going to say weird things right now. Okay.
Congrats.
Okay. It is in the Mishnah. I think it's Mishnah Hagiga 2, maybe Mishnah Hagiga. And I'm going to put it in the chat so you can see the spelling of it. And I think it's like I forget, 2 verse 3 or something. There are the Mishnah. This is the first layer of kind of proto-rabbinical writings, okay, collected by Judah the Prince in the 2nd century AD. And in Mishnah Hagiga, is this it? So somewhere in here, there's like it's very small, so it's like, I think it's 2. Look for 2. There are 3 things that you cannot just discuss publicly with anyone. Okay, you can only discuss them with certain people. Okay, try 3. Maybe it's 3. It's in here somewhere. Is it 1?
I could be in the wrong version of this. Mishnah
Hagiga is very small, so you're in the right place. We just
go to 2 or 3.
There it is. I just saw it. Go down. Search for the word chariot. Do that. Search for the word chariot. It will turn up. There it is. Bam. This is the stuff you're not allowed to talk about publicly.
Oh.
Okay.
One may not expound the topic of forbidden sexual relations before 3 or more individuals.
We'll come back to that. That's the interesting one. But first, what are the other 2? You can't expound the secrets of creation before 2 or more people. What does that mean? It means you cannot discuss the creation text of Genesis 1 except one-on-one.
Wow.
You can only talk about it one-on-one. Why?
Whose rule is this? What is this from exactly?
So these are the earliest writings of the rabbi. Rabbi Judah the Prince in like the 2nd century AD goes around collecting the traditions of.
So this isn't the Deuteronomists. This is like the way to do it. You think this is a proper way?
So these are things that are thought to be extremely sensitive to the rabbis. Like there was something touchy, there was something careful that you couldn't just openly talk about them. So one thing you can't openly talk about is the creation. And like we already said, the creation is a temple text. It's Genesis 1 doesn't look like an esoteric text to us because it's printed there on the page, but it was. And this is one of the things it tells us, is because you couldn't talk about it to a class. If you had to tell someone the true understanding of Genesis 1, it had to be in person. Okay, one-on-one. Below that, it says you can't expound the design of the divine chariot except only to one person. He has to be wise and understand things on his own already. The chariot is the Ark of the Covenant, the throne of God. So here again, there's like a secret divine thing, a temple thing, and you have to be real careful who you talk about to. It can only be one-on-one, and it has to be someone who is already instructed. Okay.
So this is like Manly P. Hall, right? You have to have the initiated or not, the uninitiated are not meant to understand the symbols.
That's exactly right. So now go back up to the top where it talks about the degrees. One may not expound the topic of forbidden sexual relations before 3 or more individuals. The topic of forbidden sexual relations is the prohibitions against incest. You are not allowed to talk about the prohibitions against incest except to groups of 2. Now that's weird, isn't it? Isn't that weird? Why can you not get up in front of a class and say, do not boff your sister? It is prohibited. You cannot sleep with your mother. Except that there's something about that. There's something about that. There's some like footnote. There's some caveat that had to be communicated that was super sensitive and connected with sacred things. And so it may have to do with this kind of slipperiness where, man, Asherah seems to be married to the father, but is she sometimes associated with the son, right? And I don't know. No rabbi, no Kabbalist has taken me aside to say, Dave, here is what the deal is.
We're going to set that up.
Yeah, if you are in the chat, if you are Rabbi Meir, a Kabbalist, and you can drive to Utah, or I will drive to where you are, I would be very interested to hear what it is.
It's interesting. One thing about that, you're talking about the creation account as an esoteric text. Most scholars agree that Genesis is sort of a mesh of different creation stories where first God creates man and woman together, then God creates woman from man's rib. Origin, he believed in a pre-existence of spirits because he believed the first creation was a creation of spirits, and then the second creation was a physical creation. But then when we get to the book of Jubilee's creation story, day 1, this is something the Deuteronomists removed because they removed the host of heaven, they removed the sons of God. Day 1, the creation account, the sons of God were born on day 1, right? And they participate in the creation, which is why Genesis says, let us create them in our image. So we have that sort of idea of a pre-existence. And I know you mentioned that in the video Ward Radio uploaded earlier about how in Jubilee somewhere it talks about how the angels taught about the Day of Atonement before the world began.
Yeah. The creation of angels on day 1 is one of these subjects. Margaret talks about this that is apparent, like it's in a lot of text. The Song of the Three Children has it, for example, but it's apparently sensitive because it gets wiped out of a bunch of texts also. So some people really did not like the idea that there were divine beings created early in the process with God who participated in, for example, creation. Yeah.
Yes.
Although maybe this is a good segue to reading Proverbs 3. Should we go to Proverbs 3?
I just had it open, sure.
And I think after this, one thing that would be good to go into is the idea that Margaret Barker really revolutionized, that Christianity was a continuation and revival of this esoteric First Temple religion with sons of God.
So let's talk about this, and let's give a couple of examples. So let's talk about the tree of life, maybe, and the Nehushtan. So verses 13 to 18, Andreas. So 13, happy is the man that findeth wisdom. Now here's the thing. There is a pun here, okay? This is the so-called beatitude formula in Hebrew. Happy is the man that something. What it's translating in Hebrew under is really the phrase, oh, the happiness of. Happiness is esher, the plural construct form. Ashrei is oh, the happinesses, and then it belongs to whatever's next. Oh, the happiness of the man who findeth wisdom. Okay. Well, Ashrei, commentators have observed, kind of sounds like Asherah. Okay. Wow. Now, is there any other reason to think this is about Asherah? Well, if you go down to verse 18.
Well, also wisdom right there, because wisdom is Sophia. I mean, it's the...
Yes, wisdom is a feminine goddess. And verse 18, what this ends on is the tree of life. So this passage says,
she is
Asherah, wisdom, tree of life, right? So Margaret's point is, in the Bible, this is the one passage that seems to very clearly say Asherah is wisdom, Asherah is the tree of life.
Wow. That's really good.
Now, by the way, so this is Chad was Chad. This is a great point to raise, right? So one sort of, so I know we've already kind of had like oh man, the Bible is not a unified whole. It is a minefield conversation. Some of you already hate me. Now some of you are going to hate me even more. So there's a lot of evidence that the Christians, the part of the first temple religion that they thought they were carrying on, is the part the Deuteronomists were trying to wipe out. Okay. For example, the tree of life. Now, if you look at, and I want to come back to Isaiah if we have time. Hopefully we can do that. But if you look at, for example, Revelation 22, okay, this is the very end. I think I might have to have a Tolkien moment here too.
Yeah, I'm actually finding something right now. I know there's a lot of references to the tree of life in Enoch and how the temple was defiled and they'll return. I'm finding one right now to put in the chat.
I mean, there's just also, someone's gonna be upset when we bring up the Sephiroth. But yeah, let's get to Revelation 22 here.
So look at 22 verse 2. So this is the last chapter in the sort of standard Western Bible. Okay, and this is the restoration of of Jerusalem as a temple in the future, and this is the vision of the Holy of Holies. Okay, we know it's that because verse 3 that says the throne of God is there. Okay, and by the way, verse 1 also, he showed me a pure river of water of life proceeding out of the throne of God. Well, what is there in the Holy of Holies of the temple with the throne of God, according to John the Revelator, is the tree of life. In the midst of the tree of it, on either side of the river, was the tree of life with its 12 fruits and with its leaves that heal. Okay. And by the way, anointing oil was always understood to be the oil of the tree of life. Okay. So this thing, Asherah, literally is what 2 Kings 23 says that Josiah cut down and burned and ground into powder. This goddess, Proverbs 3 says, is the tree of life. Here is John the Revelator saying, in the New Jerusalem, one of the things that will come back is the tree of life. Where will it be? In the Holy of Holies, in the temple. It is with the throne of God, right? And again, hey, that makes perfect sense if you think that that there is a God and there is a goddess, and the throne and the tree should go together, right? So, sorry, go ahead.
There's also in Luke 7:35, which also refers to wisdom as a mother. So it says, but wisdom is justified by all of her children.
This
so
is in
it's
the
again
where an unnamed woman is anointing Jesus, and right, and like then 3 verses later in chapter 8, suddenly Mary Magdalene shows up.
It's got to be. I don't know.
I am 95% sure that is correct. Wisdom is just because a woman, this is, man, okay, we're like going all over the place, but this is awesome. So if you were a space alien, okay, and you came down and someone handed you the Gospels and like a Greek dictionary, so I'm going to understand this, and you would read through and you go, there's this guy named Christos. What does it mean? Anointed. Oh, there's a guy. Every gospel calls him the anointed. Who anoints this guy? The answer is, in every gospel, a woman anoints him. Right. And
I cut out, so I don't know if you guys heard that, but also there's some apocryphal references I have here from the New Testament Apocrypha, but in Luke chapter 7, verse 35, I believe, it refers to wisdom as the mother. It says, wisdom is justified by all of her children.
And isn't the passage, this is in the passage where a woman is anointing Jesus, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Isn't this also like, is it Esther or the book of Ruth where she like washes the feet of the master with her hair as well? There's like a whole bunch of things with this idea. So, this idea of women having this power as another thing, that it's, why are they doing the initiation? What is the deal with that? Like the feminine.
So this looks to me, and we could talk about all the verses that kind of sort of point at this, but none of them is a slam dunk. But look, I am inclined to think that the way the first temple worshipers of Yahweh understood the Melchizedek priesthood is that Melchizedek priests were born, and they were born of women, and they were anointed by a woman or by a group of women, and those women were understood to be the tree of life, and they were anointing him with their oil or her oil, and they were understood to be the goddess who is the tree, the seven-armed menorah, which is clearly a tree. If you read its descriptions in Exodus, it has fruit and almonds and leaves and branches. That's nowhere. It's not clear any place, but like there are all these little hints that kind of add up to that, including this. And I love that wisdom and Chad, I had missed that wisdom's in that passage. I've even quoted it recently and not realized that wisdom is justified of her children. Man, that's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's another passage. So
I was just
this was from the Nag.
Oh, sorry, you go ahead.
Sorry,
you go ahead first.
Yeah,
sorry.
so from the Nag Hammadi library, and it was later quoted by Saint Anthony in the mid-4th century. So this was a passage that was considered semi-orthodox for a while in Christianity until it was removed. Return, my son, to your first father, God, and to wisdom your mother. Wisdom summons you in her goodness, saying, come to me, all of you, O foolish ones, that you may receive the gift, the understanding which is good and excellent. I am giving you a high priestly garment, which is woven from every wisdom. Clothe yourself with wisdom like a robe. Put knowledge upon you like a crown. Be seated upon a throne of perception. From now on, my son, return to your divine nature.
Boy, throne of perception and the idea of the woman with the big eyes is connected again, too, don't you think? Is that Gospel of the Hebrews? Which one is that?
That is in the Nag Hammadi library from Teachings of Sylvanus Silas.
Oh, okay.
And it was quoted in a letter by Saint Anthony in the 4th century. That's the reference I have on it.
So these are the Nag Hammadi library are a bunch of codices, books that are found basically in bat guano in Egypt. And man, archaeology, the story of how stuff gets found is often as interesting as the story of what the stuff is, because we love to imagine that all of the finds are found in an orderly fashion at an archaeological dig supervised by a university, and that ain't so.
No, the best ones are off the back of a truck. For sure.
That's right. Someone sells them, like a Bedouin shepherd finds them, a bat guano digger finds them, a bandit finds them, and then they trade hands in the most terrible fashion. They're like stolen, and like they're bought up on the black market, and people, right, like Dead Sea Scrolls, Nag Hammadi texts, like all this stuff.
9 mummies. There's a lot of
versions,
but I think also I just really quickly wanted to say also, like in Hinduism, they have this whole idea with kind of the Mahadevi and the Yakshis that are associated with the sort of trees and the tree of life and everything as well. I find that interesting. There's just so many stories that connect to the idea of the goddess or the divine, like beyond a goddess, like the divine feminine, right? Like this is primordial feminine that's connected to the tree of life.
100%.
Yeah. And in that passage, I think that goes back to your idea of the woman in the Melchizedek priests, where in this passage, it could be referring to you, it could be referring to Jesus Christ, but there is a person who is a son of God and a son of wisdom, who is his mother, and he is given this garment of wisdom, of divinity, and through wisdom he returns to divinity, and he has a crown on his head, so he's both a priest and a king, right, who is clothed in wisdom, the divine feminine. So that could go back to being anointed by the oil of the tree of life.
But yeah, so like that's another thing. So like this idea that Christianity is kind of trying to reconcile what's missing from the First Temple period. So you're kind of saying you think that there is maybe an underground continuation even up for like centuries, even till Yeshua Jesus' time.
Yeah. So we know, right? We know. I mean, you read the New Testament, and we hear about Pharisees and Sadducees and zealots, and they're all fighting each other. And by the way, we sort of imagine sitting in Sunday school, we know what those all are. One of my favorite quotes from J.P. Meyer's 5-volume commentary on the historical Jesus was, the dirty little secret of New Testament studies is how little we know about the Pharisees. Okay? We have the writings of one Pharisee, one, and that is Paul. Okay. Other than Paul, we don't have the writings of any Pharisee.
Good guy Paul, good guy Josiah. Okay, keep going.
Yeah. That's who's right. So we don't really know what the Pharisees believed. We think maybe they were sort of the ancestors of the rabbis. We extrapolate things from the New Testament, but the New Testament writers weren't their friends.
Right. There probably were some like good cop Pharisees out there, right? Like there was probably like office like Sadducee friendly. There must have been.
And then, like, the New Testament doesn't mention the therapeutai or the Essenes that show up in like Josephus, right? So we know there are a bunch of groups, but we also know that when Jesus shows up, okay, and he's not like a mysterious guy out of a cloud. Like, he's that guy. He came from over there. His dad was a construction worker, and that's his mom, and those are his brothers. And he's a very not mysterious person, right? And yet somehow within a generation, there are all these people in Palestine who are willing to say Jesus is Yahweh. So they believed something, they understood something that caused them to receive Jesus this way. And so, yeah, I think, and this is not me, this is really, if you're like interested in this, what you should read is the 17 books published by Margaret Barker over the last 20 years. Yeah. Great. That's, I think, the third. The first is the Older Testament. But this is basically her point over 17 books.
The description of this book is, what did Son of God, Messiah, and Lord mean to the first Christians when they used these words to describe their beliefs about Jesus? In this groundbreaking, clearly written book, Margaret Barker goes against protocol and treats these three titles collectively. She explores the possibility that in the expectations and traditions of first-century Palestine, they belong together, and that the first Christians fit Jesus' identity into an existing pattern of belief. Barker claims that pre-Christian Judaism was not monotheistic, and that the roots of Christian Trinitarian theology lie in pre-Christian Palestinian beliefs about angels, a belief derived from the ancient religion of Israel, in which there was a high God and several sons of God. Yahweh was a son of God who manifested on earth in human form as an angel or in the Davidic king. Jesus was a manifestation of Yahweh, acknowledged as Son of God, Messiah, and Lord. So I think that sums up that idea pretty well.
Dave, also just in terms of this idea of like so you've got this Christ emergent thing then that's saying that there is this atonement, because the Deuteronomists have said, let's get rid of the Day of Atonement. Let's get rid of atonement kind of in general, except for we'll do sacrifices. So what is the deal with that? Because, I mean, I think at some point you talked about like the two goats, the two serpents.
Yeah. Right? So this is interesting because we're down to like half an hour-ish, and there's like so many ways we could go. So let's talk about, let's do this. Let's hold Isaiah for another conversation.
Good. We could do more. I love it. Okay. Yeah.
Let's talk about Day of Atonement, and then maybe we have time to talk about the Nehushtan and like as another example of how the stuff the Deuteronomists hated, Jesus like,
I'm gonna do it anyway. I'm punk rock.
And this is all going on at the time where they edit out the idea of Yahweh being a son of El Elyon for reference for everyone that forgets that.
So Day is a Day of Atonement. So now again, the Day of Atonement does survive. Okay, it does. If it was up to the Deuteronomists, it wouldn't. And they got the idea. They say clearly no man can atone for the sins of another. They get rid in their account of the sin offerings, and they get rid of the Day of Atonement. But the book of Leviticus survives separately over in the other collection, the Tetratuch of Israel's history. So one of the things we need to understand is that the Deuteronomists never won a complete victory. For all that they got political power, we've said this various ways, they never completely seized control, right? So there is Day of Atonement in Jesus' time. And so this is discussed in Leviticus 6 and now, right? Yom Kippur is the Day of Atonement. So I'm gonna walk through this sort of quickly. Maybe we can look at scripture references if we want. But Leviticus 16 in the Old Testament and Tractate Yoma in the Mishnah are the two sources for talking about the Day of Atonement. Leviticus 16 is old. Tractate Yoma is written in New Testament times, like 2nd century AD. Okay, so these are like 1,000 years apart. So nevertheless, we can see the basic outlines of what happened. So there are a series of sacrifices on the Day of Atonement. This is in the fall festival. It's after. I think it's after. I think it's after the New Year. Maybe it's right before the New Year, about the time of the New Year. And there are a series of sacrifices performed by the high priest. So obviously they don't do the sacrifices now, although after the red heifer, maybe they will. I don't know. Very interesting. So one, there is a ram that's a burnt offering, and I have no comment about the ram. Okay. Two, there is a bull that the high priest slays for himself. Leviticus 16:6, the bullock is for him. So, and the blood of the bullock, so I think we have to understand that this is the blood of the priest, okay, is splashed around on parts of the temple, and it's splashed on the Ark of the Covenant.
Wait, this is the priest's blood? This is like a Brigham blood kind of thing going on here?
Yeah.
Wow.
In verse 6 only says a little bit, right? But there's more.
Just a little bit of blood. It's very Slavic. Like, okay.
Yeah. Well, it's all of the bull's blood, but yeah. So the bull is the high priest, and the high priest's substitute blood gets splashed on various places, including on the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant is a box which has cherubs on the sides. Together they form a covering, the kaporet, the covering, and it's also a seat. It's the throne.
Now, are these like adorable baby-looking cherubs, or are these like six-winged, like multi?
Well, the six-winged flaming serpents are seraphim, but they are like probably something like winged lion monsters or multi-faced things. Yeah, you'll recall that in the Abrahamic tradition that an angel shows up, and the traditional first thing the angel says is "Fear not," which is because they are scary.
Very Hieronymus Bosch moment. Yeah,
that's correct. That's correct. I heard a theory about where the wings are exactly actually this week that was pretty clever. We often see pictures and the cherubim lean toward each other and their wings point to each other. That wouldn't make a very good seat. But what would make a great seat is if the cherub on the right side has one wing out and one wing up and back.
Oh.
And then the cherub on the other side was the reverse, right? One wing out. So then you had two wings creating a seat and two wings creating a back, which I thought, that's like the Power Rangers Megazord of
someone should draw that.
Correct. Yeah, that would be, because you never see that. You see the angels doing this, which would be like, that would hurt my bum to sit on.
I wouldn't do it.
Yeah. So this matters. The ark gets blood on it. Okay. The other sacrifice is in verse 8, and it's the sacrifice of the two goats. And it says you have two goats. Aaron, so Aaron is the high priest. Aaron comes out of the temple and he draws two lots. And this assigns one goat to be, the King James says, for the Lord, and one for the scapegoat. This text looks like the King James or something very close to the King James. So what is scapegoat? Well, scapegoat in Hebrew says Azazel. And so old commentaries would say, this is a demon. This is a demon. The Israelites, this is reminiscent of the olden days when they placated demons. Okay, and this is a sacrifice for placating demons. That's not a very good answer. We'll give you a better answer here in just a minute. Okay, so the sacrifice goes like this: the high priest comes out, he draws lots. One of the lots, and he reads them, and one of the lots has the name Yahweh on it. And this is the one time in the year when the high priest reading that lot pronounces out loud the name Yahweh. And the ritual response is everyone must fall down. Everyone falls when the name Yahweh is. This is the traditional bow in the ancient Middle East and also the Eastern Mediterranean. It's not bow at the waist, curtsy like a Frenchman. It's lie flat on your belly in the presence of divinity. Okay?
For the goat sacrifice.
Well, when you read the name of the Lord, and this will matter.
Okay, for the Lord's name. Okay.
Yeah, we'll talk through this in a second. Why this is interesting. So then what happens? Well, the goat that is said to be, that King James says is for Azazel, is chased out into the wilderness. Now, what the Tractate Yoma, the later version, says, they led it out very far into the wilderness and then threw it into a deep ravine to kill it. So, but the point is, it has to be sent out of the camp, right? And so in Tractate Yoma, they don't want it coming back. So they lead it far away and then they throw it down a pit and it dies. And then the goat that is said to be for the Lord is sacrificed, and that goat's blood goes in the same places where the bull's blood goes. So the goat of the blood and the bull go together in places inside the temple and onto the Ark of the Covenant. Okay. Now, all of this sounds old and weird, and what the heck is going on? Well,
it sounds like LA in the 90s, but it's not that retro.
It sounds like little Santeria, or little some Haitian immigrants are cooking up a feast. There's nothing weird here.
Sounds like mainstream Hollywood. Go on.
Yeah. So verse 8, it turns out, Leviticus 16, verse 8. Turns out there's another way to understand the Hebrew here, because it says one goat is for the Lord and one goat is for Azazel. But the preposition that is translated here as for can also mean as, meaning one goat is appointed to be the Lord, and one goat is or to represent the Lord, and one goat is appointed to be or represent Azazel. Now,
which is quite a difference of interpretation, really. I mean,
which changes the whole meaning of the rite.
Right.
And we're going to see in a minute. This is the point. This is where we're driving this train, Andreas. This is clearly how John the Evangelist understands this. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So let's. Who's Azazel? Well, we know Azazel from First Enoch, right? In First Enoch, which is sort of the great apocryphal text that if you're going to pick one thing to add to the Bible, almost everybody says, man, it ought to be First Enoch.
Bring him in, yeah.
Yeah. And by the way, it was on some proposed lists for the canon quite late in the process, okay, into like the 4th century, I think. So Azazel is, there are two different accounts of the rebel angels. And in one of them, Azazel is the head of the rebel angels. And what happens to Azazel is he is thrown into a pit in the wastes of Dudael, and he's lying there suffering.
Dudael?
Yes. No one, I did write a piece of fiction in which Dudael was in New Mexico, but like we don't actually know this. So, but that's interesting, right? Because if the goat is appointed to be Azazel, then that goat is the rebel angel, and it is driven out of camp, or it's driven out and thrown into a ravine to represent the pits, the waste of Dudael. And the other goat, which is the Lord, is sacrificed, and the Lord's blood is spilled on the ark, and that is what causes atonement of sin.
Wow.
Now
and isn't there this idea of Gehenna? Isn't that the place that the ravine goes to? If I remember.
So I don't think it's Gehenna. Gehenna is like one of the valleys right there on the side of Jerusalem, and I think the image there is that it's like perpetually burning garbage, and so the image is like flame that never stops, and that's how it gets associated with hell.
But this idea is interesting because it's against the Deuteronomist reform that something can represent as the scapegoat, represent as the Lord in this exchange, in this atonement rite.
The idea that the Lord would have a body, that it would be of all things a goat. Right. This is so non-Deuteronomical. It's crazy.
It's like Knights Templar with the Baphomet. I don't know.
And then you see in the New Testament, it says that no substitute was used this time when Jesus Christ atones.
Yeah. So Hebrews, right?
Yeah. The book of Hebrews is very clearly the Day of Atonement ritual from First Temple Judaism, where it talks about the Aaronic priesthood and the Melchizedek priesthood, and Jesus being the high priest, and that his atonement, there was no substitute needed this time. So it's a very clear that Christianity is a revival of that tradition at the very least.
And let's look at John briefly. Okay, let's look at 3 passages in the Gospel of John. First of all, John chapter 18. So the Last Supper has happened, although John doesn't actually describe the supper, but he gives like 3 chapters of discourse that refers to verse 5. And then he goes up into the garden and they come to arrest him. Judas has betrayed him. Okay. And verse 4, who are you looking for? They say, verse 5, Jesus. Jesus saith unto them, I am he. Now the italicized he means that word is not in the actual Greek. So really, Jesus says, I am. Okay. Now, John, characteristic of John is
What are they
Jesus.
doing implying things with the italics? I don't like that.
Yeah. Go back and look at Revelation 22, verse 2. There's a bunch of words that aren't in the actual Greek because they're trying to guess the meaning. They don't understand what it means, or they're just trying to smooth out the English sometimes. But John says, I am, which he does several. Jesus says this several times. It's characteristic of John's gospel, these I am statements. And this is sort of the shortest cut to understanding this is that when Moses in Exodus 3 talks to the burning bush, he says, who shall I say sent me? And the bush says, I am that I am. Okay, which is Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh. This is some form of the name Yahweh. Okay, and maybe the form is actually Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh, and Yahweh was a more daily form, or maybe it's the name Yahweh, but somehow Jesus is in this moment pronouncing the name of the Lord. Now let's just think back, right? The high priest comes out of the temple, and before the sacrifice, he pronounces the name of the Lord, and everyone falls down. Jesus here in verse 5 comes out of the upper room. He says, I am. He is pronouncing the name of the word, the name of the Lord. And verse 6, as soon then as he had said unto them, I am, they went backward.
Wow.
And fell to the ground. This is the Day of Atonement starting that John is showing us. Okay. And Jesus is the high priest because he's the one pronouncing the name, but he's also the Lord. He pronounces the name, knocks everyone down. Now, if you scroll down to verses 39 and 40, so I'm just going to hit like 3 passages really fast to show you that for John, what's going on is not the Passover. What's going on is the Day of Atonement. Okay. Verses 39 to 40. Here's Pilate. He's like, I don't really want to kill this Jesus guy. Seems like a bad idea. He doesn't seem like he really deserves it. He says, verse 39, you have a custom that I should let one person go. How about I release the king of the Jews? And they say, no, release Barabbas. Now, the name Barabbas is Aramaic. What does the name Barabbas mean? It means son of the Father.
Right. Son of God, Abbas, Bara. Yeah.
Jesus is also the son of the Father. Why are there these 2 guys in custody who seem to be in some sense the same? Well, the answer is that Jesus and Barabbas are the 2 Day of Atonement goats. And Jesus is the goat that has been chosen to be the Lord. He is the Lord. That means Barabbas is the other goat. So he has to be chased out of camp. He gets released from prison because he is the Azazel goat. Now, one last verse, chapter 20. We're still in John 20, verse 12. Again, the point we were making here is that for John, okay, Deuteronomists didn't like Day of Atonement. If it was up to them, if we only got what the Deuteronomists passed on, we wouldn't know anything about the Day of Atonement or the idea of atonement, which they tried to get rid of in all of their writings. That whole idea is anathema to them. But for John, the sacrifice of Jesus Christ is a Day of Atonement sacrifice. So verse 12, this is Mary Magdalene, Jesus' wife, and she looks into the sepulcher, okay, and seeth 2 angels in white sitting, one at the head, one at the feet, where the body of Jesus had lain. Now let's just remember, what does the Ark of the Covenant look like? It is a box
2 angels.
with 2 angels. She looks in and sees two angels, one at the head, one at the foot. This is where the body of Jesus has lain. This is where the blood of the bullock that's the high priest and the blood of the goat that is the Lord Yahweh has been shed. John is telling us with this image, the Day of Atonement sacrifice was accomplished here, right? And then to Chad's point, the writer of Epistle to Hebrews, whoever that was, says, also says this was a Day of Atonement sacrifice, but in this case, there was no substitute. There was no goat. It was the Lord who was the high priest. So
super interesting, man. Especially like thinking about, we talked earlier about some of the crazy symbols that people like are looking at with the Knights Templar and their association with the goat, and everyone's like, what's good and what's evil, and like what did Jesus really want you to do? All of that seems to be connected to this.
Yeah, and it's very interesting because I've had lots of people tell me, because my entire meme page on Instagram is just full of Josiah hate memes all throughout it. And I've had people say, oh, Josiah was just clearing out idolatrous stuff. That's all a coincidence. What do you have to say to people who say it's just a coincidence that there was a ritual where the Lord, who in that time period would have been understood as the Son of God, is slain for our sins? At the same time, the idea of him being the Son of God is also edited out of the scripture. This ritual was removed from the calendar.
I mean, it's really, I get it, right? Like, it's not like people have been saying this for 50 years, and so it's become rooted in our culture. People have been saying this for 2,600 years, right? That Josiah was the hero, that he was the good guy. I don't know what to say other than, the New Testament writers John clearly thinks that the Day of Atonement is the paradigm for understanding Jesus, and the movement of which Josiah was a figurehead wanted to get rid of it, disagreed with the doctrine. But even more simply than that, Josiah killed a bunch of people, not foreigners, his neighbors, right? What was in
kind of his own people, really. Yeah.
His own people. In contemporary terms, the problem Josiah had was religious pluralism. Okay? He had some of his people who believed differently from him. His response was to go murder them. Now, there is a level at which I just want to say, if you do not, even when I confront you with this, if you don't hesitate and go, oh yeah, that is interesting. If you just say, no, God wanted it, I don't know what to say to you, right? Like, you ought to be able to at least say, maybe that was not right. That's interesting. Let me think about that, right?
Yeah, I agree.
Can I show you? I know we're kind of 2 hours. Can I show one more example?
Please do.
Kind of 4 verses here. That's
we can definitely go over a little bit.
Okay, all right. There's a risk once I start talking that I just don't turn off because there's so much cool stuff to say here. So the Nehushtan. So 2 Kings 18. Okay, the Deuteronomists have 2 great hero kings. One is Josiah, kind of near the end of their reign, their grip on the throne of Judah, and one is near the beginning, King Hezekiah. In fact, maybe what happened is during King Hezekiah's reign, or shortly before Hezekiah's reign, the northern kingdom fell. Look at verses 4 and 5 here. And maybe where the Deuteronomist movement came from was scribes from the northern kingdom who came down and brought it with them. Maybe. Okay. So what did Hezekiah do? He removed the high places, break the images. Now, 2 things in particular. He cut down the groves. That means he destroyed Asherah. So like Josiah, this guy went after Asherah, who is the tree of life, who is the goddess, who is generally understood to be the mother of Yahweh, the son of Elyon. Although it is interesting, in some inscriptions, she seems to be married to Elyon because understandings change over time, or who knows why. Okay. So he goes after Asherah, and he break in pieces the brazen serpent that Moses had made. Brazen is brass. He broke the brass serpent Moses made. For unto those days the children of Israel did burn incense to it. Okay, so Moses made it, so we would ordinarily respect it because Moses is our big hero. But the problem is the children of Israel burned incense to it. And he called it Nehushtan. Now, the fact that he says he called it Nehushtan is interesting. That sort of suggests that's not its real name. Okay, it's that Hezekiah called it Nehushtan. We'll see in a minute.
It's a pejorative or something. Yeah.
Like it's a pejorative. Yeah, we'll see in a minute. It probably means something like snake thingy or brass dealio. Okay. So this is what he did. Now, by the way, for these acts, verse 5, almost verbatim, it's almost the same words as 2 Kings 23:25. He gets the same praise Josiah does. There was none like him, and there was none like him before him, and none like him after him. He was the greatest king Judah ever had. Okay, they both
He was the best king. Yeah,
right. Yeah, he was the best king. But like just like Trump, like they get like which one is better because they both say this is the same thing about both. I don't know.
Yeah.
So okay, so this is what he did. Now let's look at Numbers 21. We can see like what is the deal with this.
Which one is this again?
Book of Numbers, chapter 21.
Numbers 21.
Yeah, book of Numbers. And we're going to read verses 6 to 9 here. So this is the story of the Nehushtan. Okay. So this is on the Exodus. The Lord sends fiery serpents. By the way, serpents is Nechashim. Fiery is Seraphim. And if you're thinking, David, that sounds like
right.
Seraphim. It exactly is.
I was thinking that earlier because the fiery serpent thing. That's the Tanakh talks about the fiery serpent. Yeah.
That is it. So a seraph snake. Okay, since seraphim snakes.
Oh, the seraphims, the seraph. Okay.
Yeah, we're going to go to Isaiah 6 next and see the seraphim. Okay, this is going to be good.
I like it.
So, and people, they bite people and they die, which you do when fiery snakes bite you. Therefore, the people came to Moses and said, "We've sinned. Help. Please take away the serpents." And Moses prayed. And the Lord said unto Moses, now there's a translation lie here. The Lord said unto Moses, "Make thee a fiery serpent." Here's the lie. Serpent does not appear in verse 8. It doesn't say make a fiery serpent. It says make a seraph.
Wow.
Make a seraph and set it upon a pole. This is the King James guys, man, not to be trusted. Make a seraph, set it upon a pole, and it shall come to pass that everyone that is bitten when he looketh upon it shall live. So God's command to Moses is make a seraph.
So what does he mean to make a seraph? Is he making an idol for a seraph to inhabit? Is it a...
Well, let's look. That is the right question, okay?
Yeah. I want to make a seraph, yeah.
Yeah. What is a seraph? Verse 9. Here's how Moses interprets the command to make a seraph. And Moses made a serpent of brass. So a seraph is a serpent. He made a serpent of brass and put it on a pole. And it came to pass that if it bit anybody... when he beheld the serpent of brass, he lived. Now, by the way, serpent is Nachash, brass is Nechoshet. So when it says like the serpent of brass, it's Nachash Nechoshet. There's like a pun here. Hebrew loves puns. And this is why apparently Hezekiah called it the Nehushtan. It's the brassy, snaky thing.
Also, there's something weird here because like there's something like ancient Hebrew about dragons where like serpents and birds have like a connected root word, and now today we know that birds and reptiles, the birds are reptiles, right? Like
super interesting. Yeah. Okay, I like that. I do not know very much about it, but I'm interested in hearing more. Okay, so that's the story. Okay, that's Numbers 21. So what we learn from here is, okay, this stuff comes from the Exodus. Moses made it, and a seraph. Like when Moses is told, make a seraph, what he does is he puts a snake on a pole. All right, we should look at Isaiah chapter 6. Isaiah 6. Isaiah 3 through 6 are such colossally central, pivotal chapters in the Old Testament. We should all have them tattooed on our bodies in Hebrew.
Some of our friends do.
Yeah. I'm very close. If I were a single man, I would have done it already. So this is part of Isaiah's calling. It's not the whole thing. It's part of his calling, one of his two calling visions. So in the year King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting upon a throne, high and lifted up, and his train filled the temple. Where are we? We're in the temple. We see the throne. What's the throne? Well, it is it's the Ark of the Covenant. It might be the cherub throne if that really is a separate thing. I sort of tend not to think so, but either way, it's fine. Okay, so in other words, this is a vision. We're seeing visionary things like Isaiah sees the Lord there, but we're seeing it. The vision is based on real furniture, right? So he's like physically, he's seeing himself in the temple. He's seeing the throne of God, but God is there, right? Above it, now it, okay, cannot be the train, which is actually skirts, because in Hebrew that's plural. So it actually can be him. So in other words, it can be above the Lord or above the throne. So above the Lord sitting on the throne. So it's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other, I think. Okay.
Right. It could be the whole celestial kingdom thing. Yeah.
It could be. Above the throne stood the seraphim. So that means they're coming out of, right? The throne of God, the Ark of the Covenant is in the Holy of Holies. If these seraphims are above the throne, that means they're coming out of the Holy of Holies too. Now, remember, by the way, why is Hezekiah, 2 Kings 18, apparently upset with the Israelites and what they do in Nehushtan? He's upset they burn incense to it.
Right.
Now, where would you burn incense to it? Well, the answer is in the temple. There's an incense altar in the middle of Rome. So that implies the Nehushtan was in the temple. And we know that when Moses is told to make a seraph, he makes the Nehushtan. He puts the brass on the pole. So if we're seeing a visionary version of real things, that tends to suggest that the seraphims here are the Nehushtan.
And they're being constructed like in a temple or a tabernacle. Or something.
That they are stored there, that they are used there, that they maybe are related to Aaron's rod that was turned into a staff and was kept stored there, according to Hebrews 9:4, right? By the way, that there's maybe more than one of them because there's clearly at least 2 of these seraphs.
Right.
So this is a Nehushtan that comes flying
Spear
down.
of destiny.
Yeah.
Man.
Now, all we knew before was that it was fiery as serpent. Now we learn more stuff. Each one had 6 wings. With 20 he covered his face. With 20 he covered his feet. With 20 he did fly. Fiery 6-winged serpent is coming down to meet Isaiah. By the way, it's probably not feet. That is probably a euphemism for private parts. The snake is preserving its modesty with 1 pair of wings, and with 1 pair covering the face, and then it's flying with the 3rd pair.
This is totally in left field here, but like I was just thinking of the what are they called? Like, aerial antennas, like, those old TV antennas on your house that have like 6 bars across them and then
That's interesting. We should be thinking of all kinds of connections, though, including, for example, Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent of Mesoamerica. We absolutely. That's what we should be seeing here, and it's also on fire. One cried to another against. There's 2 of the seraphim, 2 of the Nehushtans, and said, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory." And the posts of the door moved at the voice of him that cried, and the house was filled with smoke. Why is the house filled with smoke?
To manifest that incense, to like let there be a presence for.
It's the incense. Isaiah is burning incense in front of the Nehushtan. He's doing exactly the thing that made Hezekiah mad.
He's going to get in trouble. Yeah, exactly.
He's going to get in trouble. That's exactly right. And by the way, these guys are contemporaries. So like the story that says that Hezekiah and Isaiah were friends, that's what Kings says. The book as we have says that it seems to say they're basically
maybe colleagues are the word. Yeah.
Like they're like that is
contemporaries,
Yeah. We're not even looking at Isaiah 5, which we'll do maybe another time. So Isaiah seems to be burning incense to the Nehushtan, to the seraph. And then he said, then said I, woe is me, I am undone. I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips. Mine eyes has seen the King, the Lord of hosts. The Lord is the King, by the way, upon the throne. So remember, what is the serpent on a pole supposed to do? If you're bitten by a snake, it heals you. It saves your physical life. Okay, saves your life.
With healing venom.
With healing venom. Isaiah is now saying, my problem is sin. 6. Then one of the seraphims, then flew one of the seraphims unto me, because I am a man of unclean, having a live coal in his hand, six-winged fiery serpents, also with hands. So this is fear not, right? Why do they say fear not? Because they're scary creatures. Which he had taken with tongs from off the altar. He laid the coal, he laid it upon my mouth and said, lo, this hath touched thy lips. Thine iniquity is taken away and thy sin purged. The fiery, flying, six-winged snake saves your mortal life from the bite of the other snake, and purges sin.
Right. It like infects you with like superness. This is crazy. Yeah. This is interesting because it's also kind of like the Isis Epic of Gilgamesh, perfection, idea.
Yeah.
And then we have John chapter 3 about the Neshutan again.
That's it. That's the last one. John chapter 3. So John's talking to Nicodemus. Because remember, what's our theme here is that the parts that the Deuteronomists hate seem to be exactly the parts that the Christians say, no, that was the good stuff.
They're
That's
into
the
it.
part that explains our religion. Atonement, the sacrifice of the two goats, and verses 14 and 15. Here's John has Jesus talking. So, scroll down to verses 14 and 15. This is Nicodemus comes to him by night, right? No man can see the kingdom of heaven. Yeah. And Jesus is talking about himself. And as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, even so must the Son of Man, that's me, Jesus, be lifted up, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have eternal life. Jesus is saying the fiery six-winged serpent on a pole that saves your physical life from the snake bite of the first snake. By the way, we could follow that down a rabbit hole, but that Satan is the other snake. Okay.
Yeah.
And also purges your sin. That is me. That's the thing that King Hezekiah, the first great hero, king of the Deuteronomists, smashed to bits.
So what you're saying is not
Jesus
only
is
does
serpent,
the
man.
Gospel of John talk about one thing that King Josiah and Hezekiah purged, the Day of Atonement, but another, the Neshutan, and connects them both to Christ at the same exact time period where the sons of God doctrine and that one of the sons of God was the Lord was removed. So it seems like Josiah removed things about Jesus Christ.
Yep, absolutely. The Christians so this is Margaret Barker's argument. It's not mine, right? But the argument goes like this. Hey, we have this conventional way of talking about things that goes, hey, the Jews are descended from the, King Josiah. These guys were the Jews, and Hezekiah, they were the Jews, and Moses and David, they were the Jews, and they were the Jews all down through the Second Temple period, and then the Christians broke off. And that's not actually a very good way to think about it. A way to think about it is, hey, the First Temple legacy was deeply contested. We know that because the books disagree with each other and because the books fight with the archaeology, right? Things that are hugely popular, the books condemn, which makes sense, by the way. Why would the books condemn something unless, in fact, it was popular and also they disliked it? So the legacy is contested, and there are multiple heirs of the First Temple. And even in the New Testament, we have there's the Pharisees and there's the Sadducees and there's the Essenes, right? But one set of heirs is indeed rabbinical Judaism. These are the people who try to make sense of the loss of the temple and engage in this literature of debate and then sort of bind themselves with their traditions and learning, right? And become this kind of learned religion, hoping for restoration of the temple, valuing the temple, but living without it, right? A different heir of the First Temple is Christianity, which seems to be the people who really valued the First Temple stuff that the Deuteronomists wiped out. Atonement, the flying serpent that heals and purges of sin, the tree of life, right? And it's not an offshoot of Judaism. They're both descendants of whatever David and Solomon and
Yeah, there's a primordial core there. It seems interesting also just the goat and the serpent thing, because you've got other traditions like, in the Veda, they talk about Vishnu and Krishna. Krishna's like the master of the serpents as well. And they have a connection to the scapegoat. There's all these different traditions that kind of have this idea. And it just makes Jesus seem way more metal, right? Because we don't really compare him to the serpent.
Would you say
serpent Jesus?
Yeah.
Would you say that one reason that many of the Jews rejected Jesus Christ as the Messiah was because of King Josiah's reforms? Would you say that that was a factor in the Pharisees and such not recognizing him, while at the same time there were others that immediately said, "You are the Messiah, you are the Son of God"?
That seems to be the upshot of the Gospel of John, right? Is that the changes at the end of the First Temple period meant that a lot of people were either couldn't recognize Jesus for what he was, or saw him as the heir of the bad tradition that had been stamped out and needed to be stamped out again, right? And that is surely not exclusively like, look, it's not like there was a one-time fight, right? There were multiple layers of editing the Bible, and there are different kind of movements, but like the big one is this apparently a century-long battle to try and control the ideological turf, with the Deuteronomists making war on everybody who went before them. And it's so yes, I'm saying a lot of words, but I think that is broadly probably right. And by the way, there are other errors of the First Temple, right? And we probably don't recognize all of them. But when we talk about Gnostics and we're trying to figure out who are the Gnostics, and some of them seem to be Christian and some of them don't, that they may not have seen the dividing line between themselves that way, right? But they may have had a different understanding, or different understandings, plural, of things they were learning that they'd inherited from the First Temple, or the Mandeans, or the Samaritans, or others.
Yeah. I saw a video the other day where Margaret Barker was actually saying that she believed the reasons why the Gnostics viewed Yahweh as an evil god was because they believed that the Second Temple Jews were so apostate that the god they worshipped was literally Satan.
Yeah, the Yahweh was them, right? For this group, Yahweh was the god of the Deuteronomists. Yeah. By the way, Islam. One way to understand Islam is that it too is a descendant of an heir of these traditions. And man, there's a lot we don't know about the actual life of Muhammad and kind of what happened.
Absolutely.
The first biography is written long after he's dead, and we know that Arabia has it since at least the time of Isaiah. So for hundreds of years before Muhammad, had pockets of Jews, including priestly Jews, kind of hiding out in it, right?
Right.
There.
You look at Spain. Spain was so chill before the Inquisition. Come on.
Yeah.
And Islam actually has a few stories that are from the Gnostic Gospels in the Quran, like Jesus Christ as a baby creating clay pigeons and breathing life into them.
That's funny. I don't know that one. But there are great, like the Proto-Evangelion of James, I think, has him killing one of his playmates and then resurrecting him.
Absolutely.
For the purpose of showing his power.
Well, I think
like Krishna.
This is something to go more into at another time. I think that these reforms are exactly where the Book of Mormon comes in, because coincidentally, before all these reforms were known about, the Book of Mormon takes place in that exact same time period. A lot of the dialogue and things seems to correspond with it being a group who's fleeing the Deuteronomists and them saying that we are preserving this record so that they will know we always knew who the Son of God was.
And it shows that kind of idea that this isn't, something that's progressed, because every version of the progression ends the same. It's like humans becoming humanists and secular, but there's always this sort of core thing that people keep trying to latch onto and hold on to, which contains mitzvahs and rites and celestial religious experiences, right? Like that are all over the place. But we definitely need to talk about Quetzalcoatl, and we have to talk about the American on this.
Yeah,
Bible goes
I'm going to be completely honest on the Book of Mormon thing. I think that the Deuteronomist reforms in regard to the Book of Mormon is one of the most important things that we can learn. Like you've seen my Instagram, me posting about it. I've probably told 50 or so people to buy your book, Plain and Precious Things, and they have, and they sent me the pictures. I've posted it, and I probably spent about $200 myself sending super chats to Ward Radio to have them cover the Deuteronomist stuff and saying you need to have Dave Butler or Quick Media or someone on.
That's awesome. It happened. It's interesting, and this is not all. So yes, a way to understand the Book of Mormon, and I get that at this point we lose some readers, but we've been losing them. We're losing listeners from time to time all along, so that's okay. Is this kind of a time capsule that says, look, if you take it seriously as history, right? When do these guys leave Jerusalem? It turns out they leave right during the conflict, right? Shortly after the reign of Josiah. And what do they say? They say the ruling class at Jerusalem is trying to kill us. And what do? They go and they set up their own altar and sacrifice on it, right? And they have visions of the throne of God, and they say they know the secrets of the throne and all the stuff that Deuteronomy says you can't. So one way to see it is as a kind of a time capsule to the other point of view. The Deuteronomists were trying to obliterate, which, by the way, we would expect after this discussion we've had, right? We would expect it to sound a lot like the Christian point of view, because that seems to be John's take is, hey, all the stuff that Deuteronomists hated, that's exactly the Jesus part, right? And so we'd expect the Book of Mormon to sound to some extent like that. So that is,
and from the title page of the Book of Mormon, and this is something like, if you're writing any future books, I don't know if the language of Adam covers this at all. I think this would be a good topic for the Book of Mormon. It says that it is a record for first the Jews and then the Gentiles to bear testament that Jesus is the Christ. Now, if you put that in the context of the Deuteronomists and the Jews rejecting Christ because of it, this is literally a record that is meant to show the Jews the pre-exile religion, to show them Jesus Christ was always taught about. And
or at very least the
very
idea
interesting.
of the Emmanuel, of the atonement, of like the
Sure.
they weren't calling him necessarily Steve or Jesus yet, but
and we get
it's very interesting
questions about translation, but I love that because so Josephus tells us that the word Jews comes into use after Babylon. So A, he might be wrong. B, the beginning of the Book of Mormon is only a few decades before that, and what it seems to mean to the early Book of Mormon writers is the tribe of Judah, the Judahites who are at Jerusalem. And so I think that's probably right. That probably is the way to read that, Chad. Is like, hey, this is who is this for the ones we left behind? And this is a big conversation, and it's a Book of Mormon conversation. But man, the experience with the Deuteronomists leaves its mark all over the Book of Mormon. Those guys have clearly experienced editing of sacred texts. They are worried. The sins they are always warning against are consolidation of power and wealth to oppress the poor, right? Like that experience is imprinted very deeply on that book.
and a very strong emphasis that this is a record to bear testament of Jesus Christ, that he has always been known, right?
Yeah.
Dave, I love what you're doing here. Like, I want to make sure everyone checks out your work. Everybody should go to davejohnbutler.com so you can check out. He does a lot of cool sci-fi stuff, which, hopefully you're down to come back and we can talk more. We can talk about the Book of Mormon, because
Totally.
We talked about
and order his books as well.
Yeah, that's the point of that. Make sure you guys go to his website. You can pick up his books, not just his. He's got sci-fi as well. I want you to check out the Witchy. I'm going to pick up that one while you continue on.
Sweet.
Where's the other page there? What was hard to find? If we go here, maybe.
The front page ought to have like a. Shoot.
Oh, I screwed it up. Sorry. I'll go back. I got this. Go to DaveButler.com. Boom. There you go.
The front page, and click on the right side. It'll get you to sort of the main page of the stuff for adults. I need to. If you're thinking, man, Dave, your website is like really clunky and stuff. Like, yeah,
We might have to talk about that as well.
I need to update it. You're like the third person who's basically said, Dave, that's overdue.
I mean, these days AI is going to just help people buy your book, so it'll be okay. I know that I saw one of your things had like an audiobook on Audible, so that's already winning. So
they all do
that. That's the best thing ever. But yeah, I hope that we can talk again soon. Especially, I mean, we talked about archaeologists and people finding things off the back of a truck. Joseph Smith picking up 9 mummies or whatever, and everything we can find from Uia to Akhenaten and Moses, and that whole period leading up, like. Through the Book of Mormon, there's more that we can understand about Jews out of Egypt than ever. So there's a lot that we could do archaeologically just because of that. So
yeah. Before we go, 2 things. One, if I Venmo you, can I get a signed copy of The Language of Adam when it comes out?
Yeah. Reach out to me. Let's figure out how to do that. I don't have copies yet, but I should be able to get them.
Okay. And 2, I want to see your reaction to some of my anti-Josiah memes on Instagram, because I put out so much anti-Deuteronomist propaganda.
That's awesome. Do they get it, or are they just kind of going? I don't know.
They're getting it. I actually organized a group chat.
Gonna get something, yeah.
Yeah, I organized a group chat with about 30 people. They all ordered Plain and Precious Things and Temple Theology to study through, and other books as well. But those are like the 2 required ones. They're like the introductory information, and I just constantly spam that stuff. So if you could pull up my Instagram, I want to go through a couple of those memes.
All right,
to end off the show on a funny note.
We do the Chad memes. They're pretty sweet. Latter Day Chad on Instagram. Where do I go here? Posts here?
Yeah, there's one. The one with the glasses. That's my most recent Josiah one. I got a few more down below.
Where this one
up
here?
In the right-hand corner with the nerd glasses.
It's like a sigil. It just gets you thinking, you know.
Like you got to play the sound on it too. It makes it funnier.
Oh, I don't know if I can't get the sound to play on my side of the thing, and it could be copywritten. That's how you trick me. I know that's your whole plan. But point is, Dave, we're gonna have you back, and at some point we're gonna meet like under like the Salt Lake, and there'll be like Saturn there, and we'll be able to see the seraphim. We'll have an antenna that'll be the seraphim. It's great.
I think it would be very good to do one on the religion of the visionary man, both in the Book of Mormon and the New Testament, like going in on the ideas of them in the temple being the incarnations of angels and sort of those esoteric ideas. I think that would be really interesting.
You know what? I'm up for it. If your audience will bear it, Andreas, I am totally down to come back.
Let's do it, man. Let's get weird. Thank you, Dave. See you soon.
All right.
Chad.